I'm Jennifer Della Quadri, and this is the Raising Happy Teens podcast, where you learn how to successfully guide your teenager into adulthood without losing your sanity in the process. Let's do this. Welcome back to the podcast. Happy New Year. This episode is all about money. And you may have a reaction when you hear that, thinking, oh my gosh, it stresses me out. Oh my gosh, this makes me excited. Everybody has some type of preconceived notion about money, and the new year is a perfect time to talk about it. So this episode is going to cover a lot of financial questions that you may be having and how to help support your teenager with making good financial decisions. Because let's be honest, one of the biggest challenges we face as parents is how to teach our teenagers how to be responsible with money. Because there's just so many things to consider. Should I give them an allowance? How can I encourage them to save for the future when that thing they really want is just sitting right in front of them? It's just really tough. And especially if you've never learned these tools yourself. So that's why I invited today's guest, Veronica Karas, on to help us out. Veronica is a certified financial planner who helps women and couples create a financial plan that reflects their values and the impact they wish to leave behind. And that includes your kids. She's also the author of the Money Matters series, which has sold over 250,000 copies worldwide. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about how to set your teenager up for financial success, discussing everything from allocations, determining needs versus wants, and the real purpose of money that will completely change your and your teen's perspective on it. Let's go ahead and dive into this episode with Veronica Karas. Welcome to the podcast, Veronica. I'm so glad to have you here and learn from your expertise and wisdom. Thank you for taking the time to come on.
Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here. Really excited to have this discussion with you.
So before we get talking about the topic of today, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and share with my audience who you are and your background?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Veronica Karas. I am now a financial advisor for Cap Trust. I run our Lake Success team here in New York. But by way of background, I came here as a refugee immigrant with my mom and her parents in the early 90s, and grew up really, really poor as a result. We all got to bring 2 suitcases and $40 each, and that was pretty much it. I was basically raised by a single mom with the help of her parents, and everybody worked really, really hard all around me. And I started working really young because I knew nobody was going to pay for school for me from an early age. And I started, so I started working at a Subway sandwich shop when I was 14 years old. It was my first job as a sandwich artist. And my husband will jokingly say I could still make a pretty good sandwich these days. So at least I learned something from that. When I was growing up, at some point, after we moved here, my grandparents ran a mental institution in Belarus before we came here. And at some point, my grandfather was actually able to bring some money over here, about 7 years after we came to America. I was really, really young still. And he walked into a local bank branch and spoke to the only Russian-speaking advisor there, who sold him 9 annuities across like a very small amount of assets, like $40,000. And, they were terrible products. There were good annuities out there, to be clear, but they were like guaranteed 1% return with 3% fees. And he lost money every single year. So it was his whole life savings, and it just went down, and it was awful. And at some point when I was closer to probably 16, 17, he was like, hey, you've been working for a couple of years here. Could you take a look at what I have? Because I don't understand any of this, and my money keeps going down. And of course, I had no financial literacy training in school whatsoever, like everybody else. But I took his, stack of papers to a social studies teacher that I liked and trusted. and said, hey, could you just take a look at this? I don't know what it is. My grandfather doesn't know what it is. And he looked at it and he was like, I don't know a whole lot. I'm just a social studies teacher, but it looks like your grandfather was financially taken advantage of.
Uh-huh.
So I started looking into everything I could about annuities. I mean, nobody ever teaches you what an annuity is,
Yeah.
what to look for, how to read them. I started, I was at the library doing research on like what to look for in terms and conditions and like what guarantees mean and expense ratios and everything. And
Yeah.
I kind of clobbered it together. There were some librarians that helped me, but I clobbered it together and, figured out my social studies teacher was right, that that's what
Okay.
happened.
Hmm.
Um, and so then I really wanted to be an attorney that put bad financial advisors in jail because I was really mad that
Okay.
somebody did that to my grandfather.
Of
But my
course.
grandfather is an optimist. He's climbed Mount Everest and was a chess master champion in Russia.
Wow.
So he was like, hey, maybe there is, a different end of this field where you're not angry at the world and you could help people instead. So to prevent,
Mhm.
what happened to me. So I went to school. I went to business school. I didn't know what that really looked like or what that meant. So I went to I have a general business of bachelor's degree in business administration, and I started working for a life insurance company as an intern at a school because I found out most annuities are sold by life insurance companies. So I really wanted to understand the products, how they're sold, what makes people sell them. Found out exactly why somebody did that to my grandfather, which is
Mhm.
incredibly high commissions. That's really
Mhm.
why. If you
Mhm.
place lots of products, you make lots of money, basically,
Yeah, of course.
regardless of what it does for the beneficial owner. And then one of the advisors who was there taught me about the difference between a fiduciary and not a fiduciary, which I'm happy to talk about. But I learned that there was a subsect in the financial world of people called fiduciaries who are legally required to give advice that's in the best interest of their clients and
Mm.
not care about lining their own pockets, which is
Okay.
exactly what I was looking for.
Yes.
And so he split off to actually start his own fiduciary firm. It's called a Registered Investment Advisor, and I joined him.
Mhm.
Spent 5 years there. I had a 8-month blip at a broker dealer when the Obama administration was actually trying to pass the fiduciary rule back in 2015.
Okay.
And then have met my now partners and joined that company ever since. So I've been a fiduciary registered investment advisor for basically my whole career.
Yeah.
And I always say I have the best job on the planet because I get to help people make their dreams come true.
Yes.
And um, further to that, I get to mentor a team of young advisors. There's not that many women financial advisors. It's actually a
Mhm.
field where it's still 85% male and only 15% female.
Yeah.
And so I have a team of almost all women that I get to mentor, and it's been an absolute blast. I would say, and the other thing I get the privilege to do is I launched through the Captures Community Foundation, launched a nationwide financial literacy program where we're helping teens actually learn all the things I wish I knew back when I was
Yes.
16 years old.
That's what
So,
it's all about. You take the challenge that you're seeing and you help other people who are in that challenge through those so that they don't struggle the way you did, or like you
yeah.
said, the way your grandfather did.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So my grandfather from bad financial advice had to work until he was 84 years old.
Wow.
And still doesn't have a whole lot of money, but if you take $40,000, ballpark what the number was, and it was invested properly, it would have doubled, tripled, quadrupled, five,
Oh
six
my gosh.
X in the time that instead it lost half of its value.
Oh,
And so like that's, I always say a good financial decision doesn't just change your own life tomorrow or the next year or 10 years from now. It potentially changes your family's life,
yeah.
20, 30, 50, 100 years down the line. And I
Yeah.
take that responsibility very seriously
Of course
and
you do.
am very happy to be part of the industry that does it right, let's say.
So good. With all of that experience that you had growing up and then self-taught and then taking it and being able to share it with the world, what you mentioned, part of that is helping teens learn these things. And as you know, this podcast is all for parents of teenagers. And I know so many conversations I've had with the parents I work with have to revolve around helping their teenager understand money. And it's challenging, and I'm saying this from firsthand experience, to teach my teen how to have financial literacy where I completely don't understand it and struggle with budgeting and some of the terms you mentioned. I'm like, I have no idea what that is, which is why I brought you on because I knew that you could give us so much information to help us. And the point is, the reason why I thought you would be such a great expert to bring on is because the approach that you are taking is so that it won't be stressful for everyone involved. Like,
Yeah.
same thing what you were saying is so that it's a positive experience. Because so many of our experiences with money revolve around like negative, lack, there's not enough. And to be able to raise kids who can see how to budget and finances in a different light, for sure.
Yes, for sure. So I think a couple of things. You're absolutely right. It starts a little bit with us, right? So
Yeah.
I don't know what you heard about money growing up, but I heard things like, I'm not made of money.
Uh-huh.
Money doesn't grow on trees. Money
Yeah.
doesn't fall from the sky, right? You get your like
Good
typical
point.
things. And then, and you know, you have to work really hard. My mom worked 3 jobs when I was growing up and went to school, and like I saw the struggle. And
Mhm.
so I think some of it starts with us and dealing a little bit with our own issues around money and like
Okay.
what is money? Like there are some people I kind of jokingly say they're allergic to money because they don't want to
Mhm.
talk about it, they don't want to even address it.
Yeah.
And that is in itself instilling habits in your kids subconsciously that maybe you don't want to instill, I think. So a
Right.
lot of parents just don't clue their kids into money.
Okay.
And so, for me, when I went to work at Subway, I was making $5.25 an hour. So,
Mhm.
which ages me a little bit, but
I wasn't going to say anything, but I
like
get it.
$15 minimum wage, not
I
when
know,
I was
right? I'm like,
there.
wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah. Um, but so, you know, then it really became apparent like what going to the movies costs because
Yeah.
I started equating it with, okay, it's got after taxes to buy a $9 movie ticket. I have
Yeah.
to work for like 4 hours,
Yeah.
right? And forget about popcorn, right? Like
Oh, yeah.
everything became that like relationship of time is in exchange for money. And that
Yeah.
was my first because my family didn't know anything about money management. It was really my first experience with it. My mom did an amazing job making me not feel like I lacked anything when I was
Mhm.
young, even though like looking back, I knew we were poor, but like while I was in it, I had a great childhood and I was really, really
Yeah.
happy. But she also never talked to me about money in general. Like if we went to the store,
Mhm.
and I wanted something, and she would sometimes say yes and sometimes say no. And there was no explanation why one thing
Mhm.
versus another. So I think some of it starts with those little things, like even just cluing your child into the thing that like things cost money. I have much younger kids, so I was saying
Okay.
you have expertise that I don't have because my oldest is about to be 3 years old, so
Okay.
we're much younger. We're in the much
Uh-huh.
younger stages here. But I've already started little things like when I'm teaching him numbers and we go to like Target, I will tell him like he can buy a toy, but the first number on the label has to start with a 4. It's got to be
Okay.
under $5. So it's like
Yeah.
little things like look for a 4, right? And like I don't know that I'm teaching him so much in value, but I'm at least teaching him like that there is this concept that something costs money.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the things, there's a couple of things that I've seen some of my clients do that I've always written down, like, I'm going to do that with my kids. So, like, one of them is a concept I love. It's called save, share, spend, which
Uh-huh.
every dollar you get, and they sell them actually, they sell them on Amazon. They're these like Lego shaped clear boxes.
Yeah.
And when your kid gets money, you talk about how much do you want to save, how much do you want to share or give to somebody else, like whether that's for gifts or charity or whatever is important for your family values, and how
Mhm.
much do you want to spend on yourself. And like every
Mhm.
single thing is that you kind of clue them in that money comes with it decisions, because
Okay.
that I think is the biggest challenge that most young adults have entering the real world. And what is most stressful is if they've never had to make decisions about money and suddenly
Mhm.
they're really thrown into a lot of decisions about money, including really big decisions like taking on student loans. or
Right.
opening credit cards, it's extremely jarring because they've
Mhm.
never had to do it. And
Right.
so, so little things that I've seen is like as kids get older, especially when they're teenagers, is, go above, kind of going above and beyond and including them in some amount of family financial decision making. So,
Yeah.
like, let's say you're planning a trip. And this is like going to be really basic. Let's say you're planning a trip to Europe or something,
Mhm.
and there are a selection of add-ons for the trip, and you're like, okay, we really want to do this tour, and your kid is like, that sounds great. I would love that tour. But then it's so expensive that we would have to, I don't know, not have really nice dinners for
Yeah.
3 of the nights or something like that, right? Like this concept that money is finite, but
Uh-huh.
include them in the understanding that like this is our total budget for the trip and these are all the different menu of options we can allocate it between, but we can't go beyond the budget, whatever that budget
Okay.
looks like.
Yeah.
Or in a family like weekly budget, right? Like
Mhm.
I have a client who always takes his son with him to the grocery store, and
Mhm.
they lay out exactly how much they're going to spend in advance, what they need, how much they assume that thing costs, and then he carries with him an index card to write down what it actually costs so that
Oh.
you can actually like understand, okay, well, if I thought this was going to cost $3, but now it costs $5 instead, because
Mhm.
that's price inflation as we're all
Yeah.
experiencing. Now it costs $5 instead. Where else is that $2 coming from? What am I not buying instead?
Yeah.
Right. And just this concept of like money is a finite thing, I think, and watching you make decisions is
Yeah.
how they will learn to make decisions. But if you hide all of the decisions you ever have to make about money, which most parents hide money from their
Mhm.
hide the concept of money. If you hide every decision and you never clue your child in on a decision, it actually is very jarring.
Mhm.
Most of my the adult children of my clients call me and they're like, I don't know if this is like a good price. Like, how am I supposed to
Yeah.
know if this is like an expensive sweater? Like, they
Right.
have no concept because their parents just covered everything for them, you know? So it's
Yeah.
balancing like what you're comfortable sharing, including small decisions, and
Okay.
what you're not comfortable sharing. And I think one of the ways I've seen it done really well is I've actually had client, talk about needs versus wants, right,
Uh-huh.
is a big one. Like if you start having conversations with your kids, one of my friends started doing this with her son because he was he was really, really like careless with his clothing. So
Okay.
every day she started counting for him how much he was wearing. So she would say something
Mhm.
like, your pants cost $40 and your sweater cost $60 and your sneakers cost $120 and your backpack costs 60, whatever it is. And she's like, you're walking out the door with $500 on you or whatever the number
Mhm.
is. Let's, and like really just bringing awareness to the
Yes.
value of like what's around them was a big one. And then, kids like to say, I need this toy or I need
Mhm.
these sneakers. Well, like, do you really need them? Right. And like just helping people understand, like, you know, paying your water bill or your heating bill,
Mhm.
that's a need, but sneakers is a want. And like just
Yeah.
starting to have those discussions, having and helping your kids like just make those choices, I think
Mhm.
is a way just to like integrate them slowly into the financial decision making that happens in the family.
It sounds like as early as possible, what you're doing is you're involving them in the process, helping them understand how to make decisions around money and how help them understand, like have awareness around where the money is going and when they are purchasing things, how much they cost, or when you're purchasing things, how much they cost. Because so often the challenge that comes up is that there is no awareness. So by the time they become a teenager and maybe they have their own bank account, they'll go out with their friends to get something to eat, and then they won't have enough money, and it's because they just aren't aware of how much money they have, and they aren't aware of how much something costs, and then they just wind up being overdrawn in their account.
Yeah, that's definitely right. And I think it's actually become harder from my generation to the current generation because everything is on a card now. And for
Yeah.
me, I was still in cash era.
Right.
So like my mom handed me $20 and I went and I
Mm-hmm.
spent 10. I knew I only had 10 left in my
Right.
pocket. my mom never gave me money, but hypothetically, right, it worked the same
If she
same
had.
same way when I had a paycheck, you know.
Yeah.
I just cashed the check. Like I
Yeah.
didn't know to do anything else with it. And so it's easier because now parents like set people up with their kids up with like their credit card or their debit card is linked
Mhm.
to their own account. It
Yeah.
seems like an infinite stream of money. And
Right.
so I actually encourage cash. I actually encourage physical cash, especially
Mhm.
early on. Probably not when they're like older teenagers, but early on when they're just starting to make decisions and you're like, okay, this is your allowance for the week. I always try to encourage parents to give that allowance in cash because there's something real about counting the money versus just seeing it like on a screen
Mhm.
or something like that. And, you know, I'm in the bagel store. So the bagel store I go to every morning happens to be across from the high school in my town.
Uh-huh.
And there are kids in there every day on the phone with their mom, especially on like Thursday or Friday.
Yeah.
Mom, you didn't refill my card.
Yes.
I'm like, I'm always like, man, I wish
I
I
know.
had
Wouldn't
that
that be
card.
nice too? Who do I
Right.
call?
What do you call exactly? And there was one woman in there who was like, I guess you're not having breakfast today.
Yeah.
And I was shocked because I actually have never seen that. Like every time a parent, like every time one of these kids calls their parents, like, oh my God, I'm going to add $50 to your account right now is usually what I hear. But this mom was like, all right, I guess you're not having breakfast. We have food at home. We can both
Mhm.
go home together and you can have your breakfast at home since we have
Mhm.
food there. But because you spent down your allowance, you can't buy a bagel today. And I thought that was such an important lesson because then it's an actual consequence to them
Right.
making the financial decisions they made. And so, like, one of the things I also always say is like, you know, help teach them, but and don't bail them out. I mean, she wasn't
Yes.
starving her kids. She was like, let's go home and eat. I'll make food for you. We'll have enough time. She's not like starving her
Yeah.
child, but she is saying like you don't get the luxury of just buying a bagel on, you know, because you want to
Yeah.
and but you spent all of your other money. And I loved that as a concept. It was an instantaneous way to reinforce the importance of like the money is finite rule.
Right.
And so like I think that's so important is like, yes, sometimes you're gonna have to bail your kid out, but for the most part, if you can teach them early on that like this is what they have to work between, that it's
Mhm.
the way to go. And
Yeah.
I find like a lot of parents. So I never got paid for doing chores, as an
Right.
example. I
Yeah.
I grew up in the you live here, so you
Right.
contribute
Yeah.
household.
This is how you contribute. You live under this roof.
But I did, you know, one of my clients did this thing where him and his wife laid out they have 3 kids. They laid out the 25 things that need to get done in their household every week that were chores and said
Mhm.
everyone in the house is responsible for 5. So there were 5 of them and they each had to do 5. And him and
Mhm.
his wife were like, well, we're doing all 25 now. So whatever they pick is
Yeah.
fine. They let their kids choose. They were age appropriate things, right? So the youngest one got like lesser things to do, right? But
Mhm.
essentially that. And the agreement they made is for each thing that somebody did that wasn't theirs, that they took it off the parents' plate or the like above and beyond. So everybody had to do their 5. But if
Mhm.
they did additional, if they did 6 or 7 or 8, they took something off the parents' plate or their siblings' plate, they got $5 for each thing they did that was above and beyond their normal
Okay.
chores. And I
Yeah.
actually also really liked that because like it teaches we're all responsible for contributing,
Yeah.
but if you do the extra, you do get compensated and rewarded for it.
Tell me a little bit about some of the parents that I work with, and the teenagers have really busy lives. So they're at school all day and then they have an after school sport, and they're not able to have an outside of school and sports job. So they don't have a way to make money.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you have any advice on how parents can teach financial literacy and have an allowance of sorts when their teenager is not able to have a job for some reason.
Yeah, so one of the machinations, like the thing I just talked about, is like figuring out how to split it. The other thing is other ways they can help the family by like making money or help the team or go above and beyond and something the parents are willing to compensate them for, whatever that might look
Okay.
like. And if it's an allowance, then it's an allowance, but just being responsible with it. But I think the Financial literacy starts with just including them in decisions. So like all
Mhm.
the things about budgeting and money making, or even little things like filing taxes, as an
Yeah.
example, little things. Filing
Mhm.
taxes. It's just 1 year, like when your kid is 16 or 17, include them in
Yeah.
what that process looks like, why it's important. Go to the IRS website, print out a blank page, 1040 form and talk about
Mhm.
what each of those categories mean and because it's all there. It's all kind of written out.
Yeah.
It's all there. The other thing is there's tons of books and content out there on financial literacy. So, and board games. So I know Robert Kiyosaki has a really good real estate investing board game. And so you can turn
Okay.
family game night into something related to money that's not Monopoly.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
or the game of life, I guess, also has
Uh-huh.
some money related to it, but it's mostly like, I got married, give me
Yeah,
money.
yeah,
So
yeah.
stuff like, making it a little bit more real.
Okay.
And then find ways where they can be really included in things. So I'll give you an example. If your teenager is getting ready to go to college, every single year, there is a publication. It used to be a physical book, but I'm sure it's online now, of like all the scholarships available in the United
Mhm.
States or worldwide. And one of the things that I did, because I didn't have a way to pay for college, is I sat there all the summer leading up to college and just wrote
Mhm.
essays for every scholarship that
Yeah.
even touched me a little bit. And so like you could take that as a job, right? So if you can't make any money, sit there and write application essays.
Yeah.
And I paid for school and the registrar's office couldn't believe it, but I had 32 like $200 to $250 scholarships that were all on my record, and it helped me
Wow.
pay for school. It just
That's
offset the
amazing.
school bill. I just sat
Yeah.
there. I took it like it was my job. I just sat there and
Right.
wrote essays, right? And because that effectively saves the family money, it is like a job. And
Yeah.
so, I just sat there and I did it. And I made I kind of made, I'm a little competitive. So for me, I was like, how many of these can I get?
Right? Yeah.
And just tried to apply for literally everything under the sun.
Yeah.
So, there's elements you can get creative that way,
Okay.
with, having your child like help in those types of things or take work
Okay.
off your plate. So my favorite is actually like one of my good friends is an older sister by like 12 years, by the way.
Yeah.
So much older. But when she was younger and her brother was in school, her parents hated helping with homework, so they would pay her to help with her little
Mhm.
brother's homework.
Yeah.
And
That
like
makes
that's
sense.
kind of an easy thing because it's not
Yeah.
really her job to do, but like then the parent doesn't have to do it.
Okay. So a little bit ago, you mentioned having them from a very early age decide in advance what they want to do with the money that's coming in, which it sounds like such a great approach. So it's not just, I'm throwing this money in my bank account. I don't really know what I'm going to do with it, but it'll be here. So it's more like you're a victim to whatever ends up
Hmm.
happening. One of the buckets is invest. So tell me a little bit more about how we can teach our teenagers and young adults how to invest at this earlier stage.
Yep. So there are types of accounts called a UTMA account, Uniform Transfer to Minors Act account.
Okay.
It's like a savings account that you can invest the funds in anything. And so I believe this is a Warren Buffett rule, but I believe in investing in the companies that you use.
Yeah.
So I would start, and I've had this conversation with clients' kids too. I would start having a conversation early on about like how much they believe in the brands that they're using. So if they're
Mhm.
buying Adidas sneakers or
Mhm.
Nike's, I don't even know what's popular these days, Nike sneakers, you can find Nike stock and then you can have a conversation with them about how stock and stock ownership works,
Okay.
how diversification works. They could also look it up. There's also a lot of financial literacy resources out there for that. And talk about if they really believe in the product that they're buying having long-term success, would they like to buy a share of that stock? And
Mhm.
just start little things like Disney, Disney is a big one, Amazon's a big one these days, Nintendo,
Mhm.
these things that like they're using every day. I think it's beneficial to just have the conversation around what it means to be an investor and growth versus not growth and letting them pick. And there are two kind of different types of investment accounts you can open for your kids. There are multiples, but the basic ones are the UTMA account, which is like a custodial investment account. You can actually also open a minor Roth IRA for them once they start making money. So if they have any kind of income, you can take your own money if you're being generous and put it into a Roth IRA for them, kind of like a match to the income that they're making, which I always feel like is a very, very nice thing to do, or some portion of it. And they can invest the dollars in the Roth, and it's money they can't touch until they're at least 59 and a half without penalties. So it kind of prevents them from making silly mistakes with it early on, but also teaches them the impact of like compound growth over time, right? Just like the benefit of sacking money away and seeing it grow over time.
I can imagine too that part of it is them making a decision about how they want to invest, and part of it could also be them watching you invest, or letting it, maybe even gamifying, like watching what your investments are too, and having those open and honest conversations about what it is, and kind of demystifying it all, because I wasn't personally raised as financially literate as my parents were or are. I didn't know anything about stocks, and I'd never invested anything. And so by the time I was an adult, it was like a foreign language for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, the a jarring experience for all of us. So I had a very, I graduated, I had no idea. You get your first job, you're like, what's what's a
Yeah,
W-4?
why didn't I get all of this money that I was supposed to get? Where did it go?
Yeah, exactly. It's really a jarring experience. And so I think it's what you said is just so important. It's like, just clue them in. If you're watching your own investments, you're picking investments in your 401k, how are you doing that? And if you're struggling, let your kids see you struggle and say, like, I was disadvantaged by not learning this. And I want, so like, we're going to learn together. Right.
Yeah,
And so, like, that's literally what I would say to, especially like a teenager. I would say, like, let's learn this together because I wasn't taught this.
yeah.
So we're going to learn this together so that you are in a better position than I am.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's another thing that you really recommend that I love so much, and that is prioritizing experiences over things. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. So I really think there's just a lot of stuff in the world.
Yes, so much.
There's just a lot of stuff.
Uh-huh.
And I know there's now this whole movement with like buy nothing groups and stuff where you can
Yes.
like repurpose everything, and I love that.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I think kids love memories. Like they're gonna
Yeah.
forget about like the sweater or fancy jeans or sneaker, whatever all the stuff is, the toys.
Yeah.
Like I have an endless supply of toys for my kids. It's so obnoxious and I hate
Yeah.
it so much. Um, but I believe that they really will value gifts. And so, like, I also really believe in contributing to those experiences together. And so,
Yeah.
like, if you know what your child is like really, really into, like my kid right now is really into Bluey and monster trucks. But one
Mhm.
of the things we've talked about is like, does he want to go to Monster Jam? I mean, he's
Yeah.
almost 3. Stick with the grain of salt. I know this can be different for kids that are older, but they're, the equivalent. When I was younger, I had heard all about traveling to South America. And it's kind of a quirk of mine. I really love alpacas as an animal. And I really
Mhm.
wanted to see a live alpaca. And my mom is like, well, you're working and I'm working. I'll save, we did some math and she was like, I'll save 3/4 of the money for our trip if you'll save 1/4 of the money. And then we
Yeah.
can go together and then you could pet alpacas and I'll go with
Yeah.
you. And like just little things like that where you're prioritizing experiences together, but also like if you just set that up for your children where you get to do stuff together, see shows, go to
Mhm.
concerts, whatever it is, those can all be really meaningful gifts that will carry over a longer period of time,
Yeah.
where they're not stressed about like being the only kid that doesn't have a Stanley Cup or whatever.
Right.
Um,
We'll still
will
be stressed about that.
they'll still be stressed about that, but they will have the memories, and that's so much more
Yeah.
important. Like I'm such a big experience person in general, and like
Yes.
money. I there's two things I always say about money to people. One is money makes you more of who you really are.
Yeah.
So if you're a really generous person, having more money will just give you more to be more generous with. That's really what
Mhm.
more money does for you. If you're a really, really, really greedy, selfish person, more money just makes you more greedy and more selfish. You get more
Right.
stuff for yourself, and it becomes louder, whatever your values really are, the more money you
Yeah.
have. And you can kind of see that in like watching the CEOs of the world in the
Yep.
public space of who they really are. And the second is more money or less money just gives you options. And so, I get this question a lot from kids, especially because kids aren't thinking about retirement. They're like, what am I really saving for? And you kind of
Right.
have to give them something that is either an experience, that's one, or
Mhm.
two, what I always say, if you don't know what you're saving for, you're saving for freedom. And I think, I've had the experience where I didn't have a lot of money and I had a really terrible boss and an awful job that made me really, really sick. And I didn't have a choice because I hadn't done a good job saving, other than because nobody taught me,
Yeah.
um, other than to stay in that job until I could leave from a financial perspective. But if
Yeah.
I do a good job saving early on, all I do is I create more options for myself so I'm not
Mhm.
stuck. So I can leave a job. So if I want to, I can move out. If I want to, I
Yeah.
can buy a car. And if you don't want to, that's perfectly fine. But saving and investing that money is just creating freedom for yourself. And I think like kids really relate to that, like having the option to get up and go. If
Yeah.
your boss says, like, I'm not letting you take that vacation, having the freedom and the savings to say, okay, I'm going to take this vacation and I'm going to go spend some time and find another job. Like that's a
Exactly.
very real thing that is
Yeah.
very, really valuable. Like and if kids get into good habits early on, like that's the one thing you can never make up for is time, especially when
Mhm.
you're investing. The one thing you can never make up for is time. So like the earlier you start, the like the better position you'll be in to just create a life with more freedom and more choices for yourself.
And what a really fantastic way to look at money instead of having all of those notions in your head, the negative notions is, there's never enough money or you have to work hard for money and all of those things. To be able to see it through the lens of money is going to provide you the freedom to make the choices you want. And there is nothing a teenager wants more than freedom and autonomy. And so
Yeah.
to be able to talk with them from that perspective of, the more aware you are with your money and the more conscious you are on how you're spending it, where it's going, then the more freedom you're going to have in your life. And it really does put the ball in their court and let them make the decisions. And that's ultimately what teenagers are needing and wanting in their life.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I agree with that 100%. And I think the earlier you can also teach them that you're going to help them and you're going to teach
Yeah.
them and you're going to guide them, but you're not going to bail them out. So when
Yes.
they make bad financial decisions, they have to deal with the consequences of that too. I think
Mhm.
that the freedom just rings more and more true,
Right.
and I think it becomes more important. Once you have one experience where you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm stuck in this position.
Uh-huh.
You never want to have it
You never
again.
want to be there again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And also, I'm so glad that you pointed out that it is a trap that parents fall in, especially if they're empathetic and they want their kid to be happy to, well, I'll just go ahead and like throw them an extra $20. But at the same time, you're robbing them of the experience of learning how to manage their own money.
Yeah, that's definitely
Yeah.
true. And like it's much easier to have the one fight with them over $20 than
Mhm.
if because there are consequences to not teaching them. And like there's going to
Mhm.
be an adult down the line who's 40 years old who never learned how to manage money and their
Yeah.
parents are still bailing them out.
Yeah.
Like that really happens a lot
Yeah.
in the
For
real
sure.
world. And
Yeah.
that all starts with somebody not willing to yield on the $20.
Hmm. Make the hard decision now so that you don't have to deal with the harder consequences down
Sure.
the road.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true.
Really good. Well, this was all so helpful, and I love the tips that you have. It's very simple and straightforward, and it all really does come down to you as a parent making a decision that you want to be part of the solution and be a good model for
Yeah.
your child, for your teenager. And I really appreciate you coming on. I'm wondering if you have any tips or advice as to when parents hear this, wondering where they can start, where they can look. Where would you advise they go?
Absolutely. So there's a couple of really great resources. A little bit selfishly, I'll say I wrote 3 books related to money. So it's the Money Matters series of books by Veronica Karas. So my first book is Money Matters, Everything You Should Have Learned in School But Didn't. And it's really geared towards 16, 17, 18-year-olds to teach them everything they should have learned about money. There are
Yeah.
some really, really good resources online. So there's free resources. So the Financial Planning Association, there's one in every major state, actually every major city, but definitely in every state, where they do free pro bono financial planning and advice. They'll meet with kids, they'll teach them about money. You're actually getting advice from a certified financial planner. And then if your family is into finances and into board games is what I'll say. So financial board games, I think is a big one for me. So I mentioned Robert Kiyosaki. There's also a game called Market Works, and then there's a cash flow board game. All of which Market Works is actually really good in teaching about markets and investing. And the cash flow game, actually, I think is also by Robert Kiyosaki. It talks about, how to start your own business and like be productive in that way. That's sort of different than Monopoly. I'll say
Yeah.
that. I think I also saw that I've never actually dealt with it, but there is somebody who told me there's something called the Financial IQ board game. So that sounds interesting, although I've never
Hmm.
experienced it. But there's so many videos online too of like just kids are so resourceful these days. Like you could
Yeah.
YouTube anything. This
Yeah.
is one of those things you could definitely YouTube, right?
Sure.
So it's like how to do a budget. And then other than that, like I said, the Captrust Community Foundation. So if you go to captrustcommunityfoundation.org, we do have a 6-series course on financial literacy that we do for nonprofit organizations free of charge. So,
Mhm.
or for individuals. So if you are in need, you can't find anything else, we're happy to share ours as
Wow, so many great resources, so many good tips, and this is going to help so many people. And
well.
the goal is to change the challenges in our generation that our next generation can hopefully not have to struggle with. So that's the goal of all of that, and this is definitely going to help in that area. So thank you so much for coming on and taking your time to share all of this information with us.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. I love it. And I'd love to hear from anybody who implements any of this, how it went over with their kid. I'm always curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Hit Veronica up. Share what your experiences are after you listen to this episode.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. If you liked this episode, I'd like to invite you to join Raising Happy Teens, my free online community for parents of teenagers, where every week I host Ask a Coach. You bring your parenting questions, and I provide expert advice and coaching. Click the link in the show notes to join today. I'll see you inside.